Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and I'm going to take a look at my TimeformUS Highlight Horse for Thursday at Aqueduct. It's in the 8th race, and this is obviously the best race on the card. It's drawn a field of 11 runners, likely to scratch down to 10, going a mile, an allowance race for nominators of 1 horses. You've got some horses that are stepping up out of New York bred company, some horses that have been at this level for a while, some coming out of a pretty strong common race, and I think it's a really interesting race to take a deeper look at. We'll start by taking a look at the entire field, and this is a race where you're not going to have a clear favorite. I made the number 5 horse, Mr. Dougie Fresh, the slight favorite on the morning line at 7-2, but horses like Allure, House Limit, and possibly even Nicodemus are all going to be relatively short prices in this race. So it's unclear where the value is really going to lie. But I want to kind of touch upon all of these short price horses before I get to my top pick in this race. And we'll take a look at the TimeformUS pace projector just before we head on to Mr. Dougie Fresh's PPs, because I think you do want to discuss the pace of this race. And it's a little bit fuzzy because it shows the number 9 horse, Monteleone, on the lead. And I think it's a little unclear if Monteleone's actually going to run in this race because he just ran on February 16th, 5 days prior, and he didn't run that well that day. He's a horse that sometimes doesn't get out of the gate that well. On the prior screen, you saw that he's a horse who actually we rate as having a mid-pack running style, and it's very unusual for a horse that has a mid-pack running style to be shown leading in the pace projector, but that's because he's stretching out in distance. And I just think it's unclear, even if this horse runs, how he's going to be ridden. The other thing to note about this pace projector is the number 1A horse, Blueit, I would think is very likely to scratch out of this race because he just ran a few days ago and won, so he's probably not eligible for this race anymore, winning at a lower level last time out. So I think he's probably going to scratch, and we're just going to go with the number 1 horse, Storm Prophet. So let's take a look at the number 5, Mr. Dougie Fresh, who is likely to be the favorite in this race if they bet him like they did last time. He's coming out of a common race with horses like House Limit and Allured. And he ran well that day. I don't want to be too hard on him. The 111 TimeformUS speed figure that he earned, it didn't really represent any improvement on his prior start, and I think you were really looking for some improvement because he was making his first start off the claim for Jason's service that day. But still, I mean, he ran fine. He took the lead over at the 8th pole and just couldn't quite fend off a resurgent Stoney Bennett who came back inside. However, I do think you want to note the pace of that race was not that fast. It's not color-coded blue, but you see that kind of rising trend of the TimeformUS pace figures from the left to the right. That indicates a horse that was towards the front, who didn't have to run that fast in the early going, and just was kind of able to maintain his position throughout in a race that didn't really play to the closer's strengths. And Stoney Bennett, who led that race throughout, came back and didn't run particularly well when he came back in a stakes next time out. So Mr. Dougie Fresh, he's probably going to get a pretty good trip again. I'm just not sure that I'm that thrilled with him at a very short price in this race. If I'm taking any horse out of that race, I actually prefer the number 4 horse, Allured, who I think is in some ways maybe the horse to beat in this race because he did run very well last time. Just considering the way the race actually played out, it was not a race that was conducive to closers. And while he never had any real trouble during the race, he was just kind of towards the back in a somewhat uncomfortable spot for a long way. And I thought he was running on best of all at the very end. He finished 4th, lost by only 2 lengths, but if he gets any more pace to close into this time, I think he's going to be tough to hold off. Chad Brown has 2 runners in this race. I think it's a good sign that he named top rider Manny Franco on this one, and I think Allure is going to be very dangerous. But 2 more horses to take a look at, one of which is a very intriguing horse coming off a layoff, is the number 8 horse, Nicodemus. And it'll be interesting to see how this horse gets bet. I didn't know really what price to make him on the morning line because he's coming off a speed figure that would probably win this race. That 118 TimeformUS speed figure is the highest last out figure in the field, but the problem is it was earned so long ago, all the way back in July at Saratoga. Also, he earned that figure over a sloppy track, and he hasn't run quite as fast on fast tracks. That said, he's a horse that was very lightly raced last year. He was actually pretty impressive breaking his maiden at Ellis Park in a relatively strong field for that venue, 2 back in early July. The problem with Nicodemus, though, while he might have a ton of talent, is Linda Rice does not have the strongest numbers off longer layoffs like this. You see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen that little snapshot of Linda Rice's trainer stats. And while she's a 92 rated TimeformUS trainer rating overall, her TimeformUS trainer rating specifically off layouts of this type is a 70. If you actually click on that, you would see that her TimeformUS trainer rating with coming off layouts of this type in routes, specifically narrowing it down, is a 54. So that's really not a strong move for Linda Rice, and I think this horse might need a race, but there's no denying he possesses real talent. My highlight horse, my top pick in this race, is the #1 Storm Prophet. I'm actually very pleased that Blewett is probably going to scratch out of this race, his entry mate, because it's going to really drive up Storm Prophet's price. And I think this is a horse that might get kind of lost in this race. And to me, he's very interesting because he's run some speed figures that put him right in the mix. That 114 TimeformUS speed figure that he earned 3 back, and even the 112 last time, they're not that much slower than horses like Allured and Mr. Dougie Fresh are running. I know he earned those against one of the last one against New York breds, but it's worth watching the trip that he got in that race because he was just extremely wide around both turns, 4 wide around the first turn, 3 wide around the second turn. If you actually look at how much ground he covered in comparison to Giodoro, who's also in this race, he ran 56 more feet than Giodoro while going so wide around those turns. So he very much, could have won that race and definitely would have finished much closer to Giodoro with a comparable trip. I kind of like the turn back to a 1-turn mile for a horse that has focused on 2-turn racing most recently, but I like his 1-turn races in the past. And Rudy Rodriguez is just so dangerous off the claim. He gets a 100 TimeformUS trainer rating first off the claim, but if you really dive into the stat in Dira Formulator, you'll see that first off the claim in dirt routes, specifically at Aqueduct, he's 28 for 62, 45% with a 280 ROI. That's just a fantastic first off the claim stat for this barn. And I think this horse can really step forward in this spot. I think it's a good sign they're actually bumping him back up in class to the open nominators of 1 out of the New York bred race last time. So I like Storm Prophet, hoping to get between 8 to 10 to 1 after scratches, after Blewett is likely to come out. And I think he could get the right trip in this race from mid-pack. So let's hope Storm Prophet can pull through in the 8th race on Thursday at Aqueduct. I'll see you next week.